Welcome to the Valmika Property Investing Podcast. I'm JP, your host and the founder of Valmika Buyers Agency. With my background in investment banking, I'm here to share Wall Street tips and secrets for building a top 4% property portfolio. Let's dive into the world of property investment together. Welcome to another episode of the Valmika Property Investing Podcast. Today we're going to discuss a topic that was requested from one of our listeners, and it is called Advanced Strategies for Boosting Rental Yields. This is a very highly requested topic because at the end of the day, investment property is all about rental yields. So what we're going to speak about, I'm going to speak about rental yield and why it's important. Then I'm going to go beyond the basics and give you a few advanced strategies that we would recommend. Then we'll move on to advanced techniques. This is more for experienced investors, but it'll give you some tips into how they think if you're not one of those sophisticated and experienced investors. And then lastly, we're going to discuss some important considerations. So let's get straight to it. What is rental yield and why is it important? Rental yield is defined as the yearly rental income that you receive divided by your property value. The running rental yield is the purchase price as the denominator. So it's the increased rental yield every year divided by what your original purchase price is. And your rental yield will obviously go up because your purchase price is what you paid for it, but your income increases over time. So that's the running yield. But the actual rental yield is what the property value is at the time as the denominator, and then the numerator of the equation is the rental income for the year. Now, obviously, and this goes without saying, is the higher the rental yield, the more desirable the asset is for investors. Now, some assets are more have a higher impact on rental yields than others, and especially goes for commercial property. Commercial property is all about cash flow. So when you purchase an industrial property, for example, if the going rate is 6%, whatever the cash flow is, you divide it by 6%, we call it the capitalization rate, and that's the value of the property. Now, if your cash flow increases and you divide it by that same 6%, the value of the property increases. That's why it is more impactful on a commercial property because of that reason. And then, of course, in a rental property, if there is an investor in an interest rate environment where interest rates have been cut and they're more willing to accept a 5% rental yield and you purchased it for a 6% rental yield, that is what we call yield compression. And then your value of your property increases even further. So that is rental yield. Now let's look at the advanced strategies around this. Now when it comes to residential assets, renovations are what can increase your rental yield. I'm not talking about cosmetic renovations. So for example, if you've got two assets that look identical, however, if the other one has got more modern finishes, you'll find that the tenant is willing to pay more for it because it improves their living standards. It's living in nicer premises and they're willing to pay for that. And it's all about when to do that. Now, when to do that is you need to determine if you had to improve your asset by a certain amount in terms of monetary value, as long as the increase in rental returns have a higher yield than they were before you had done the actual renovations, that's when it's worthwhile. So what is it that you do in those renovations to get a higher rental return or a rental yield for the money that you're spending? And we don't recommend going out and doing like massively expensive fit outs because there's a cap to how much people will pay at the end of the day. And if you overcapitalize for it, you actually decrease your rental yield on the back of it because you spend too much. So areas to target are important. So what areas in the property are important to target? Stuff like kitchens, bathrooms, flooring. Now, when it comes to kitchens, I'm not saying doing an entire kitchen fit out unless the rental returns are higher in terms of rental yield divided by the amount that you're spending, the actual uplift. But what we're saying is do cosmetic stuff like changing the handles on the cupboard doors or painting the actual cupboard doors. You can make a big impact in the kitchen by doing that. Changing taps, for example. Not a massively expensive thing because you're not really doing the kitchen, but those small things can enhance the kitchen and make it look a lot more desirable without spending that much money. And when it comes to bathrooms as well, so you can redo the bathroom, which can be a costly exercise. And if you're in a very expensive neighborhood, it might be able to justify the actual increase in rental yield on the back of that, especially if you've owned the property for a long time. But also stuff like handles on cupboards in the bathrooms, maybe replacing some of the tiles in the bathrooms or some of the tapware, or for example, the shower doors, if they're looking old, just replacing those or being able to clean them, do like deep cleaning, might make a huge difference in the bathroom, and that increases the amount of rentals that the incoming tenants will pay. And one of the easiest things to do in a rental unit, for example, is to paint. That is the most cost-effective way, the most impactful way to do it, because it makes a huge difference to the property, especially if you change it from a dark color to a lighter color, because it makes it brighter, and brighter colors gives you the impression of bigger space as well. So painting the walls, painting the ceilings make a big difference. So those are cosmetic ways to improve the asset and then improve your rental yield. So give that a once over and a think over of how you're going to do that. Next is strategic tenant targeting. So exploring ways to attract high quality long-term tenants. One of the assets that we owned, we targeted because it was very close to the business hub in a major city. So to increase that rental yield, what we decided to do was to provide a service offering around it, like a service offering when it comes to people coming in to clean the unit every week. A service offering whereby there was a chauffeur service. And what we did was we targeted corporate rentals. So with those services together with a high quality asset, we're able to increase the rent significantly higher than where a comparative unit without those services would attract. And why did it work? It worked because you had these large corporations that had international people working in their organization, visiting the country, and they would put them up in these luxurious apartments. And these apartments had service offerings, so it made it very attractive to them, and the corporates were willing to pay for it. So that is an example of strategic tenant targeting. The other thing to do is, for example, if you're not in a area that's in a business district and it won't be able to attract those corporate clients, stuff like offering pet-friendly options. It just increases your marketability of the asset, and people with pets tend to generally battle to get properties. So if there is a property that offers these pet-friendly options for them and they're rare, you can actually increase the rent on the back of it because that is a rare option for them to have. Then, of course, by improving your asset, by improving the service offering or the attractiveness of the asset, what it does is not only do you get a increased rent, but it also reduces the vacancy periods, and it gives you a much more reliable source of rental income. Any break in having a tenant can impact your returns on the property for that year quite significantly. So having these low vacancy periods is definitely a worthwhile situation to be in. So targeting these rental yields with those strategies will improve the returns on your investment quite significantly. The next one, the most obvious one, is optimizing your property management. So what is the pros and cons of having a self-managed property versus hiring a professional property manager? Well, doing it for yourself, obviously you don't have the cost of hiring a property manager. So your rental income has less cost attached to it, so your net income on the back of it increases. However, it comes with risk, and the risk is that you have to be available to manage it yourself. If you don't manage a property, you can, for example, get the wrong tenant in because you don't screen properly. Then there's laws around how to manage tenants. If you're not aware of them, you can land yourself in a litigious situation, which you want to avoid, that you've had a property manager. And also, property managers are professional. They're on top of the market. They understand where the market is in terms of rentals. So you might not be in that market. You might have a separate line of work, and you wouldn't know that the area is demanding a higher rental than you're charging, and you're undercutting yourself. So having a property manager, we always recommend to go that route, then self-manage a property. And also having a good property manager, you can help reduce vacancy periods because they can manage the transition periods to be smoother in between tenants so that you don't have that wasted time when you're actually looking for a tenant. They do it in parallel, and they've got the time and the resources to do it properly. Okay, so let's go into some more advanced techniques that more experienced investors use when it comes to rentals. Number one is rental negotiations. So there are various techniques for negotiating rent increases with existing tenants while maintaining a positive relationship. Because they're in your property and you want them to look after your property, it's always good to maintain a relationship. So it's a fine balance between negotiating a higher rent and then destroying that actual relationship. However, if you're able to negotiate on the back of factual inputs that you give them, for example, on where the market is, and you're being reasonable with where the market is, that's why you are increasing the rent, then you can increase the rent without actually destroying that relationship because you're doing it on a factual basis that you can justify. It's also important to provide value upgrades and amenities in the return for a higher rent. So as you mentioned before, if you upgrade the living conditions that they live in by making better quality finishes within the unit, then you can justify those rents. If you look for properties in an area where there is great amenities, you can obviously justify the rent on the back of that. Other strategies to use is short lease terms. So in return for a shorter lease, you can actually demand a higher rental return because you've got less certainty of income. And because there's less certainty of income, there's more risk. And with there's more risk, you can justify a higher rent. For example, Airbnb rental returns are a lot higher than you would get if for a long-term lease because of that increased risk. But if you're able to manage it, having a combination of longer term and shorter term lease, then you can actually increase your rental year quite significantly. And I'll give an example. So there's a client of ours that we purchased a great asset in Sydney for, and it's actually got views of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And what they do is they do a 11-month lease that starts beginning of January and then runs to mid-December. And then what they do is in that 2-week period over New Year, they do short-term leases for people who want to hire out the apartment to take advantage of the views of the opera house, especially over New Year's Eve where there's those fireworks. And they command quite a significant rental lease amount for that night because people were willing to pay for it. So they take advantage of it that way, of combining long-term and short-term rental lease. Pretty smart, and it's actually worked out pretty well for them. The other strategy to use to increase rental returns is actually using or offering a furnished rental. Now, if we go back to the example of attracting corporate clients to rent out your premises, having that a well-furnished apartment will improve the marketability of that asset. And it's all got to do again with the amount that you're spending on the furniture for the increased rental that you're getting on the back of it. So for example, if you're getting if you're spending $100,000, for example, on furniture, and per year you're getting an extra $10,000, and originally your rental yield was 6%, but this $10,000 on a $100,000 expenditure is 10%, it's going to increase the actual return of your rentals. So it's always good to look at it on what is the rental yield increase by spending on the furniture or on the cosmetic upgrades to what you're getting in return. And as long as it's higher than the rental yield that you're achieving now, then it's worthwhile, as an example I gave you earlier. So what are the important considerations when it comes to rentals? Number one is obviously the local market regulations. So it's important to stay informed about local regulations regarding rental increases, renovations, and tenant rights. So there are laws to how much you can increase the rental per year, and you can't just increase it significantly without justification. That is against some of the regulations. Secondly, when it comes to renovations, there's usually stratas that you need to involve, and there's regulations around how you manage the renovations, and you have to apply for it and get approval for it. So you must remember that you have to go through those steps and comply with the regulations. Otherwise, you're going to land yourself in hot water. And then, of course, there's other tenants' rights. So there may be other owners in the building, or there may be other tenants in the building, and you need to consider their rights when it comes to doing these renovations, for example. And the other thing to remember is long-term value preservation. So you might want to get or maximize your short-term gains. However, you must avoid strategies that could negatively impact the property's long-term value. And I'll give you examples. So where there is converting a home into a multi-tenanted home can actually decrease the value of the home in the long term. However, it's a great short-term strategy because your rental yield can increase quite significantly. But more often than not, when you looking to sell that asset, it's probably worthwhile to convert it back. So you must take into account the cost of converting it back when you do want to sell the asset. So in conclusion, by implementing these advanced strategies, you can unlock even greater potential from your investment property. But remember, you must do thorough research, planning, and a focus on providing value to tenants. That is the key to success. I hope you found this podcast valuable. If there is a topic you would like me to discuss in future episodes, please send me an email to info@valmikaproperty.com. And we look forward to speaking with you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Valmika Property Investing Podcast. If you're interested in our services, please visit us at valmikaproperty.com. Remember, the content shared in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. For personalized financial advice, always consult your trusted financial advisor or professional. See you in the next episode.